There are no yacht clubs in Anguilla. No commodores and flag officers in dress white trousers and blue blazers. No ensigns. No flags. No cedar-paneled halls shelved with glittering trophies of past racing glories and broken records. Yet, within this island, lapped by the crystal blue-green waters of the Caribbean, lurks a fever for boat racing. This fever that infects the average Anguillian from time to time is submerged deep within a salt-drenched past of poverty, resilience, and a determination to survive. It has been nurtured through traditions and customs which have long disappeared, but which gave birth to a sport that has sliced its way into a riot of yearly celebration. This is the story of how that fever spread, lodged itself into the rhythm of a culture, and permeated the very soul of a people.
Why is boat racing considered the #1 sport in Anguilla? I think that answer lies in our history. The reason why has more to do than just with boat racing. It has to do with who we are as Anguillians, who we are as a people. Because as a professional boat builder myself, I have seen young men in Anguilla who have come to share with me in my own company a remarkable ability on their parts to understand what it means to build a boat without any real formal training, without any real education in naval architecture or boat building. And I cannot help but think when I look at them and I see them work that this is something that they've inherited from forebears before who, many of them lying on marked graves without any recognition, without any tombstone. And yet they were instrumental in sending an invisible heritage down to these generations that have followed. But I've always felt that there is a gap, an absence of fully understanding that historical connection. It is a link to a very important part of Anguilla's history. And it is why we are what we are today, who we are today. And that is why I think this story of boat racing is important. When you look at a little Anguillian boy frolicking in the sea, behind a little pond boat made of turpentine, with sails made of plastic bags that he has cut with a scissors, and frolicking behind his boat and shouting hardly, he is simply expressing something that has been in his heritage and his history for hundreds of years. And he is the seed for another generation of Anguillian boat builders who will continue to make this tradition proud and continue to preserve a very enduring part of our history.
I like sailing boats because it keeps me occupied sometimes, fun. Expand my skills, and I just want to be out in the big world one day sailing boats. The body is built with turpentine, the hull, the keel, plywood, the sail, plastic bag. I started shaping with a machete and a hatchet and sanded off with a sander. My father helped me build a Nick Parker.
Sportsmen all over the world have an opportunity to be role models. But in boat racing in Anguilla today, there's so much community involvement. There's so many families and villagers involved in this sport and in this competition that for the young Anguillian, it has a remarkable opportunity to be a real important model for their lives. Because the guys who go out there and race and the guys who go out there and hopefully win become heroes. Whatever enjoyment, whatever glory they get from winning a race has the opportunity to influence young people, young Anguillians, to be like them, to be competitive, to work hard, to get involved in a sport that is hundreds of years old. And that again is another reason why I think boat building is important, and it's a reason why young Anguillians, young boys, tend to gravitate towards these racing boats, and their uncles and their fathers and their grandfathers who race in them, and continue the tradition that has been so important to us for so many years.
My favorite boat is the Satellite. My favorite boat is the Sonic.
My favorite boat is a Satellite because my dad built it.
Sandry, let go me hand, look the woman coming down. Sandry, let go me hand, look the woman coming down. Sandry, let go me hand, look the woman coming down. Sandry, let go me hand, look the woman coming down. Whoa, la dona, whoa, la dona. Mama, who back to Guinea, who back to Guinea, wire.
Our boat racing season begins on Easter Monday, but it climaxes in August week, the first week in August, where we as a people go nuts about this sport. And apart from the guys who have to race the boats and the guys who have to sail the boats, there are a whole X number of people ashore who are going to be arguing, quarreling, cussing, and celebrating about whatever boat they support. So as much action as there is on the sea, there's 10 times more action on the shore. But the reason for that passion, the reason for that celebration, the reason for that competitiveness comes out of a very dark and difficult history. And this all begins in 1796 with the French invasion of Anguilla.
Like every other Caribbean island of the 18th century, Anguilla was the object of war, mayhem, and plunder, brought about by the intense military and imperial rivalry between England and France.
Anguilla, prior to that time, was just like every other Caribbean, a reasonably prosperous plantation economy. Reasonably prosperous. And caught up in this constant warfare between the British and the French over colonial possessions and empire.
In 1744, the French attempted to take the island of Anguilla from the English on its northern coast, in the area of Crocus and Cartouche Bay, which, as luck would have it, was the island's most easily defendable point. The resulting battle cost nearly 200 Frenchmen their lives. It was over before it began. 52 years later, Frenchmen with a mighty vengeance for blood returned with bigger and better forces. 2 frigates, l'Odysseus and le Valiant, powered onto the shores of Rendezvous Bay, inciting a battle that would ultimately threaten the loss of more than just land or lives. Legend has it that after a waterlogged trek across the ocean, the French had laid their gunpowder out on the beach to dry.
But of course, in those days, wet gunpowder was useless. It was like flour. So they had to dry the gunpowder in order for the gunpowder to work. And the story is told that they laid this gunpowder out on the beach on sails to get it to dry. So Governor Benjamin Gums was advised by one of his associates to simply get fire sticks and throw it into the French gunpowder, which would, of course, burn up all the gunpowder and put the French at a serious disadvantage.
But with his conscience as his guide, Governor Gums refused, hoping to wage a fair fight of honor and valor against his adversaries. Sadly, and to the dismay of the people, the superior French force drove the Anguillians back, burning down the villages of what was then called Blowing Point and the road, and then on to the valley, where plantations were set afire and destroyed, nearly draining off both the hope and lifeblood of the island.
They burnt and destroyed everything in their path. They tore the clothes off women and stabbed the men and burnt everything. The old St. Mary's Church was burnt, Wallblake House was burnt, everything that stood in the valley was burnt. And they drove the Anguillians back to Sandy Hill. where the Anguillians made a desperate stand by using lead that they cut off their fry nets to shoot at the French. But even so, they were outmatched, and the French were slowly but surely winning the battle.
Finally, in an act of desperation, Governor Gums dispatched a small, fast-sailing boat to the colony of St. Kitts to implore the help of his island allies. The destiny of the island was in the hands of unknown, unnamed sailors who raced to save their struggling friends and comrades and unknowingly set the stage for a proud racing tradition.
And on this desperate race to seek help, the boom of the fast-sailing boat began to break where the sheets were tied. And of course, they couldn't stop to fix it. And it didn't break right off, but it began to break, making the sail lose its power to drive the vessel forward. And legend has it that the sailors on that boat took out ballast rocks from the hold of the boat and tied the ballast rocks on the end of the boom to keep the tension of the boom back down and alleviate the danger of the crack where the ropes were tying the boat. And apparently it worked. And this fast-sailing boat was able to get into St. Kitts, where it found the HMS Lapwing at anchor and screamed bloody murder for help.
Coming through the narrows of Flat Island and St. Martin, the warship forced the French to retreat from Sandy Hill. One enemy ship was sunk, the other driven to the shore of St. Martin, while the captured French soldiers were taken to the jails of the Crocus Hill courthouse. The Anguillians finally won the arduous battle. But when the dust settled and the islanders assessed the war-torn island, they came upon a gruesome discovery in the cellars of Wall Blake. A defenseless cripple had been savagely murdered and left to rot. The discovery of his body enraged the Anguillian people. They wanted to exact certain revenge upon their enemies, and did so by charging up to the Crocus Hill, thrusting their weapons through the bars of the jail, and discharging their muskets on the helpless French prisoners. Gone was the chivalrous and gentlemanly conduct once shown by Governor Gums, and time and legend would be left to judge the character of this bloody battle. But the anger and the bitterness of combat left its mark on Anguilla and rendered the island a very different place.
The Battle of Anguilla is important for a variety of reasons. One, there is this legend about the fast sailing boat. It sort of indicates that Anguillians, even at that time, had a desire to build fast boats. It certainly gives an indication of ingenuity in sailing and how these guys were able to figure out, even in very primitive conditions, how to make a boat work even in the face of disaster.
The aftermath of the Battle of Anguilla, the ever-present annual droughts along with the hurricanes of 1819 and 1821, plunged Anguilla into a state of abject poverty.
I always tell people that the word economics wasn't in our vocabulary at all. Economics for me is a new thing since I've become an adult. We knew nothing about them, just about economics. We used to call it, our economy was hand to mouth, we used to call it. When you have it, you use it, and you try to do so in a way that you can always find something hand to mouth.
So the hallmark of Anguilla from 1796 well through into the mid-20th century was a history of poverty, a depressing history of people struggling to survive. And it is that struggle, it is that depression that forged people to have this even closer association with the sea, whether it was on the rocks or going out in small boats fishing, being forced to learn the arts of seamanship and boat building. The people had to find a way to make a living, and that is where the sea and the boats became a critical element.
19th century Anguilla was an island in the grip of near famine, and decade after decade washed over the island without relief, purging the island and its people of nearly everything of value to the outside world. Everything, that is, except for salt. Long before the battles between the Anguillians and the French spilled blood on the shores of Anguilla, and even before the porous limestone landscapes that refused to yield a bounty of sugarcane were passed over by plantation settlers, the salt trade gave mariners a reason to note the island of Anguilla. And while much of the time the depleted land and its people had no purchasing power to create a true and steady form of trade, the 275 acres of salt ponds and its location as the northernmost island of the Eastern Caribbean made Anguilla a favored source of salt for Canadian trading vessels.
After the American Revolution in 1776, of course, the British Empire forbade any American schooners from trading with their colonies in the Caribbean. So our closest American colony was now Canada. And Canada saw a huge opportunity here to sell salt fish and lumber to all the colonies in the Eastern Caribbean. And on their return voyage to Nova Scotia, they always loaded with salt. So Anguilla was kind of convenient in that if you look at the map, you will notice that Anguilla, and particularly Sombrero, is almost exactly due south of Nova Scotia.
By removing the ballast weights made of granite rock from the belly of their schooners, the Nova Scotia seamen would fill their ships to capacity with glittering white Anguillian salt.
Sailing boats in those days needed to have ballast, which is just a whole bunch of weight rocks in the bottom of their holds to hold the schooner steady and to pull its center of gravity down so that it wouldn't capsize. So the Nova Scotian schooners that would come into Road Bay would then unload their ballast, dump them in the northern part of the bay, and replace that weight with bags of salt, taking on board as much salt as the schooner could carry for its voyage back to Nova Scotia and for use in salting fish for the next year's harvest. If you go to Sandy Ground today, you will notice that there's a reef on the northern edge of the harbor. That is not a natural reef. That is a man-made reef, which we still call to this day the ballast. In that Nova Scotian connection, we were able to receive what I call a transfer of technology. Nova Scotia was always a very excellent schooner building community. And the fact that we had really first-class Nova Scotian schooners coming in for salt, we were able to pick up some of the techniques of building, construction, materials, etc. And with the little bit of revenue we began to get from a constant trade in salt, the beginnings of the Anguillian local fleet and the craftsmanship that arose after the Battle of Anguilla in boat building began to take root. So there is this intercourse between Nova Scotia and Anguilla that had this profound effect on boat building and boat racing in the future. And it all was brought about by salt.
My recollection of the schooners is that they were beautiful because I remember the Marion Bell Wolf. I was taken aboard by my Uncle Elliot once. They were loading salt. I was so thrilled. I mean, I still remember it as one of the highlights of my life, going aboard that schooner and going with my Uncle Elliot, of course.
But there was yet another unlikely source of hope awaiting discovery just beyond the horizon that would not only give the island a temporary source of commerce, but would ultimately lure other seafaring vessels to the shores of Anguilla. If you follow the birds that gracefully ride the warm drafts of the Caribbean winds, 38 miles to the north of Anguilla, you'll find a small barren island called Sombrero.
Sombrero is a strange island, plunk in the middle of the Anegada Passage. It's a flat, barren landscape, totally denuded of any tree or any plant except for sea beans, which is a vine that thrives in salt water.
In 1860, this undisturbed base was home to thousands of seabirds. Thanks to their droppings, phosphate deposits called guano had accumulated in massive quantities. Guano was a rich source of fertilizer, and its discovery on Sombrero and later on the island of Anguilla gave the people a new and lucrative commodity to trade.
After the American Civil War, the Americans found out that Sombrero had this rich deposit of phosphates for the use of agriculture and practically took over the island, even without the consent of the British government, which technically owned Sombrero, and began to mine phosphates. So New England schooners came to Sombrero to mine and to carry phosphates back to the United States. And in addition, some of them also came to Anguilla, where there was a little phosphate mining going on in two places, one called Cavanna Cave and one area near Little Bay that we now affectionately call Jackass Hole. The phosphate mining on Sombrero was a full-scale operation with light railways and steam mills and furnaces to burn the phosphates and make it more amenable to shipping. And one of the ways they got the phosphate out of all the holes in the island was that sometimes they had to dynamite it. So they would set charges and sometimes underwater, and they would dynamite the phosphates. So the only way to retrieve that was to send guys down free diving and pick up a chunk of phosphate and bring it back up and throw it into a bucket or a basket or a boat. And that's the way it was done. So a lot of Anguillian men had to go to Sombrero and being paid very, very, very little.
Every month you have something to depend on. That's where I got Sombrero. I spent 9 years there, 9+. You spend 6 weeks, and then you would go out for 2 weeks holiday. Eventually, I had to quit because I got sick. Nothing physical, but it seemed as if a kind of melancholy used to come over me. With the loneliness, you know what I mean, of the place. And I said, well, I think I'll have to give up this job. We said, we got to get me off somehow. But the tender wasn't supposed to come back to us till a month's time or something like that. No other means of transportation, no other means of contact with the outside world.
It was a very, very, very tough existence because we have stories of explosions killing men and men being buried on the island in strange ways because you really can't bury anybody on Sombrero. It's so hard to dig a grave 6 inches deep that you had to bury them on top of the rock by encasing them in rubble and lime and just packing the dead body in some sort of coffin. But it at least provided some money for destitutely poor Anguillians. But the fact that New England schooners came to Anguilla and Sombrero between 1860 and 1880, only for 20 years, again, there was this intercourse that was beneficial in the long run for Anguilla. So when you look at the design of Anguillian schooners in the latter part of the 19th century, and certainly going into the early part of the 20th century, You can see that straight influence between Nova Scotian and New England schooners and the schooners that were built in Anguilla.
But despite the steady access to salt and the discovery of guano, the island of Anguilla and its people grew used to suffering. In 1835, a medical doctor reporting on the condition of the island noted prolonged drought, repeated failure of crops, lack of seed, death of cattle, sheep, and goats for want of food and water. Such was the fate of the wretched people. Starving, they crept into the woods and gathered berries and herbs for food. This near surrender to the harsh hand of the elements and the seemingly barren womb of their land forced the people to dig deep to find a way to survive. For decades, boats from faraway lands had ventured into the Caribbean, gathering up their take of island resources and sailing off to unknown worlds that were swallowed up by the distant horizons. But it was the boats, not the payload they carried to and from the islands, but the boats that would ultimately serve as a point of inspiration and hope for the Anguillian people. Recalling the victory of the Battle of Anguilla and the role that one single fast boat made in their survival, Anguillian boat builders began building a small fleet of schooners and sloops that would become a lifeline between Anguilla and the rest of the world. They used the little they had from the weather-beaten woods of their land and from timber cut from the forests of neighboring islands to develop the art of building better and faster boats that could ply the crystal waters of the Caribbean Sea. By the latter part of the 19th century, the ship's registry of the day showed an impressive ownership of Anguillian sloops and schooners, ranging in size from 40 to 90 tons. The transfer of technology between the islanders and the maritime traders from New England and Nova Scotia had been put to good use, and it wasn't long before Anguillian ships were positioned to participate in the Caribbean maritime economy.
We had to try and seize every opportunity we could get to make ends meet. And that opportunity arose in the late 19th century when huge American investments went into the eastern part of Hispaniola in what is now the Dominican Republic. And when that happened, there was a demand for labor. But the sugar plantations, or ingenios as they were called, recruited these men with a sort of agency office in Marigot, St. Martin. And that was so fortuitous because it allowed the Anguillian schooner fleet, the sloop fleet, which had slowly emerged with the help of the Nova Scotian influence and the New England influence, to be able to take these men to the Dominican Republic and back again.
Charging $1 to $1.50 per head for a one-way ticket, the fleet would set sail together from Marigot St. Martin in convoy on New Year's Day or the day after, and head due west off the wind for the ports of Macorís and La Romana, filled with men and boys from all over the Leeward Islands, seeking employment in the cane fields of Santo Domingo. These schooners plied a trade which would have a lasting effect on Anguilla's boat racing tradition.
The schooner fleet was, in effect, a ferry service. But there were absolutely no creature comforts on these boats. The men had to sleep down in the holds of the vessel, where there was just one big hole in the middle of the schooner where all the ballast rocks used to be. There were no bunks, there were no beds, nothing. There were no sanitary facilities. If you had to go to the bathroom, you had to hang over the side.
had to go to Santo Domingo because of the condition of Anguilla. Were not very easy to live. So I had to, my mother and father, or my mother rather, sent me away to Santo Domingo with the uncle I had to cut cane at the age of 9 in my 10th year. When I reached to Santo Domingo, I was taken by an uncle of mine and carried to a cane field. And he showed me how I would have to cut the cane. They got a machete for me, and the machete that they got for me was too big and heavy for me, so they got someone to change the machete for me to an older one that people had been using for the years past. And then my uncle showed me how to cut the cane.
They had an awful time of it, but they made some money. And that was very important to keep body and soul together for them and to keep body and soul together for life here in Anguilla.
My father went to Santo Domingo. He went several times. He made several trips there. And one trip, I can remember he take one of my brothers with him. My brother didn't stay for the crop. He didn't finish the crop. He didn't like it, so my father had to send him back home. But my father had to walk out the whole. Every time he go, he walk out the full crop, whether it was 3 months, 4 months, and then they come home.
In the meantime, the men and women who were left behind on the island of Anguilla continued to find ways to survive and turned to fishing and building up small holdings that would yield just enough of a crop to support and feed the islanders. Island life was held together through the tradition of neighbor helping neighbor to hoe and plant their crops. The work was hard, but the labor was filled with commitment. And these shared efforts bound islanders together for life.
When my father was away in Santo Domingo, it was rough. It was just my mother alone then, and it was no work.
There wasn't nothing about economics. You hear a lot of talking about the economy. Our economy was hand to mouth, you know? And unity among the people and sharing, that was our economy. And being prudent with what you have. Make what you have do is the economy of Anguilla. Be content with what you have. And don't try to live above your means, you know.
Hold forth, for I am coming, Jesus signals still. With the answer back to heaven, by thy grace we will.
In July, at the close of the cane cutting season, the fleet would then return from Santo Domingo, carrying between 50 and 150 men on each boat.
I was a little boy coming back in care of my uncles because I had nobody else but my uncles with me. And, well, they were men and I was a little child. So this night, we were on the vessel coming up, and it was very, very rough. Rain and sea water. And I hid myself underneath the stern of a little boat. And a man passed there going from forward to aft of the boat. And he put up on me where I was. And he would kick me up and say, well, what the hell is this little boy doing here? He's going to get washed overboard. He took me up and he threw me in the hole of the vessel. I fell on a man from Island Harbor called Edward Smith. And he said to me, who the hell you are? I said to him, I'm talking to child. He said, if I hadn't known your father, I would have squeezed the hell out of you.
The journey homeward was not easy. Eating only one meal a day and sleeping on exposed decks, or down in the belly of the schooner on ballast rocks, cost some of the men their lives. But the men had no choice but to endure the voyage home, a voyage that could last as long as 2 weeks, depending on the weather and the wind.
There's a run, or a run off the wind to be more precise, directly from Marigot down west to La Romana and Macaris. Now, why is that significant? The return trip is a beat now, straight back to the east, where the schooners would have to tack, because they're coming back into the prevailing wind. So on August Monday, we still do it. We run off from sandy ground, go down a couple of miles, go around a boat, back into sandy ground. That is a direct consequence of the Santo Domingo pattern of sailing.
The schooners would start the voyage homeward bound together from La Romana and Macaris. But the journey back to their families was somehow different. It seemed to bring out a natural human instinct for competition. And very soon it became evident that there was tremendous pride on the line to be the very first boat ashore. The schooner that was fastest, the crew that was the most efficient, the captain that was the best and greatest became serious topics of conversation and debate in everyday life throughout the island.
That was the way they get back, by racing one each other. They were always a race, day and night. And they were racing from Santo Domingo until they reached back to the road sandy ground.
So when the schooners started to come home, when the first sails were sighted down below Dog Island, a lot of excitement rippled through the island. The men are coming home. And one by one, sometimes collectively, sometimes individually, depending on the wind, depending on the skill of the captains, the boats would come into harbor. And there was this wonderful excitement with women and children getting involved in the activity of schooners. But that was just one part of it. The other part of it was that the men who were on the schooners were all, of course, anxious to get home. So they too, even though they were farmers and cade cutters and not necessarily sailors or shipwrights or caulkers or riggers, they got caught up in all the technicalities of the schooners, the names of all the sails, the tactics of the sailors, the fact that I got home before you. Your schooner is slower than the one I was on.
One of the great stories of the epic return from Santo Domingo was a race in 1937 between two schooners, the Warspite, captained by Joe Rumney of Blowing Point, and the Ismay, captained by Orlando Lake of Sandy Ground.
Well, I was at home at North Hill. I think the others had gone to the Methodist Church in South Hill. And word came that the schooners were in sight.
The Methodist minister had just begun his service when word whispered through the church that the schooners were in sight off Dog Island. On that unforgettable day, these 60-foot schooners under full sail, with streamers flying and decks crowded with loud and anxious men, could be seen tacking like racing boats, coming together in hard lees and tacking away again, fighting each other tack by tack to get the upper hand. Excitement filled the island.
They were all not listening to the minister. They were all craning their necks to see if they could see what was happening. And eventually one man stooped down and crept out through that door on the western side in the Methodist Church.
2 others followed him, and then 3 and 4, until all the congregation abandoned their service, leaving the minister alone in his pulpit. The worshippers erupted in spirit on the hillside overlooking sandy ground.
You could hear the noise of people calling, "Come on, Captain Lake." And a very stout lady calling out, "Come on, Joe, come on, Joe." Captain Joe Rumney's wife on the Warspite.
Neck and neck, the schooners raced into Road Bay. In that famous race, it was the Ismay that garnered victory over the Warspite. This event, and many more like it, planted a seed of passion in the hearts of Anguillians and anchored the sport to the culture, ensuring its future for generations to come.
That little story shows that the entire community was involved. And again, that's a very critical link to understanding why Anguillians can become so passionate about this. It's rooted in their genes.
When the men returned from Santo Domingo in July, the schooners were put out to their hurricane anchors in case the dreaded storms swept by. The men then turned their attention to helping their families and neighbors prepare their small land holdings for planting before the brief rainy season occurred between September and November. As communities came together to help each other in this basic but essential task, the process developed into a tradition popularly called a jollification. No money was exchanged for labor, but food and strong drink were the expected reward.
Jollification was a coming together of the community, a fair portion of the community, for the sake of cultivating the land and working each helping the other, because there was no money.
I myself had jollification. Asked people to come and work for me. When you have a lot of ground to hold, you will go and you'll tell one person, and that one person would bring 5 and 6 people along with him. So all you have to prepare, you get food and a little drink for them, and that's it.
You got to start with the drink. Rum, chiefly rum. And it didn't worry too much water. The guys just want to drink, no much water. They want to taste the thing, and they say, we want to taste it in our mouth. And you could imagine the guys were very jolly. A lot of singing used to go on, you know. You know, the song was, all hail the power of Jesus' name. All hail the power of Cockspur's rum. Let drunkards prostrate fall. And when they're ready, say, bring forth the royal demijohn. You're ready to take the drink now. Let's crack it on the wall. Bring forth the royal demijohn. And crack it on the wall. I'm sure God forgave them for using his hymn, because he knew we were suffering, eh?
May God bless us, and may we keep together as usual.
That's right.
And doing the work.
Yeah, sure.
Whatsoever, when we call,
yes,
we will be in unity with one within the next.
Now, because Anguilla didn't have any sugar plantations at that time that could make molasses and could make rum, we certainly had nothing with which we could make gin. You had to import these liquors, and that was obtained from St. Martin and St. Bart's. But at that time, the taxes on alcohol in the British Empire was so horrific that the only way people could get this important component of the jollification, this essential component of the jollification, was through smuggling.
The revenue officers of the day were feared and dreaded men, led by the magistrate, who was typically a doctor. These officers used every means possible to threaten and subject the islanders to live under their rule, as it was their singular focus to stamp out all illegal trade.
A bottle of rum or a gallon of rum or gin in those days could cost something like 2 or 3 shillings. But the taxes in Anguilla could amount to as much as 20 shillings for the same bottle. So what you bought in St. Martin for 3 shillings, you had to go pay 20 shillings to the revenue officer. They just couldn't afford it. So you had to smuggle.
We're getting rum from St. Martin, right here back of us. French St. Martin, there, Mariana, right there. Go to Marigot. You'll go over in the day to do your buying of the liquor. But then you would travel back to Anguilla to reach in the night, because it was a matter of you're evading the customs to pay whatever duty it was on it. For I remember one time as a boy, I was out at night helping my aunt at the time with some stuff she had sent to buy. I was there. And I think of it these days, I say, well, suppose the police had caught me, a little boy, go in jail for smuggling, you know what I mean? So there it was, they would come over and they would land their stuff and then they would hide it.
Smugglers used to pass right above my mother's house. They come from corridor, wherever the boat landed stuff, and they had a cave corridor. That cave's supposed to be still there, where the smugglers would go and they would hide in there.
The next issue was, what boats did they use? The boats were like they were in 1824, like they were in 1796, small open boats. That means no deck. And that is a distinguishing characteristic of the Anguillian racing boat today. There is no deck. But the small Anguillian sailing boat that smuggled to St. Martin had no deck because it was a traditional craft. And also because it was easily hauled and easily altered. And let me explain the alteration. Everyone knows that sailing can be a very silent and peaceful experience. Just the waves lapping against the hull, the sails aren't making any noise because the sails are full of air. But once the boat tacks, or once the boat loses the wind, the sails begin to flap and you have a lot of noise, potentially. So what the smugglers had to do was they would come into their pre-appointed landing zones, full speed, with the sails full of air. And as soon as they would have to stop the boat, of course, and the sails would begin to flap, they had to drop the mast, the rig, the sails down as quickly as possible for two reasons. One, you wanted to stop the noise of the sails flapping, and secondly, you didn't want something sticking up in the air for everybody to see. And that has been a link to the modern racing boat, which a lot of people don't even realize. Anguillian racing boats typically step their masts and drop their masts at the end of a race in the exact same way that the smugglers did. But also, the smuggling boats, the fishing boats, were designed for speed. Because number one, of course, all fishermen like to get home at night. That's a given. But also, they had to be able to cross the channel quickly at night from St. Martin. So shipwrights had to be focused, boat builders had to be focused on the elements of making a craft fast. Those three historical facts, the salt trade, the phosphate, and the small plantation, had a profound influence on boat racing that most of us don't realize. It is in that history of poverty and depression and the consequences of 1796 that the genesis of Anguillian boat racing lies. The story of Anguillian boat racing is a story of endurance. It reminds us of our intimate, indispensable association with the sea, which even today continues under now the guise of tourism. Were it not for our beaches, were it not for our marine environment, we would not have a viable tourist industry. And the racing boat in Anguilla exemplifies all those aspects of our history, the Anguilla racing boat in a real way sails into the present from the past.
On the first Monday of every August, a celebration echoes throughout the English-speaking Caribbean. August Monday commemorates the emancipation of slavery in 1834. But in Anguilla, two friends in 1940 infused this holiday with added tradition and meaning. Mac Owen of North Hill and Elliot Carty of Sanderground joined together in an effort to celebrate the art of boat racing by starting a formal regatta. Gathering the fishing boats from the villages of Sanderground, West End, and Blowing Point, they launched the August Monday Regatta in Road Bay, which has now become a vibrant annual festival.
Now every green teeth is a smile. Mama told me that from a child. Now every green teeth is a smile. Mama told me that from a child. They will talk to you about love. They will bring you so much of good. They will tell you that they care while not having you anywhere. You have got to be aware. They have a lot of falsehoods out there. People come up to you so sweet. They want to wrap the shoes off your feet. Now every green teeth is a smile. Mama told me that from a child.
Mac Owen and Elliot Carty focused a lot of effort on making the fishing boats more than just work boats, but racing boats as well. Mac Owen in particular was very instrumental in this. He built the first boat in Anguilla, constructed specifically for racing, and he named it after his daughter, Violet.
He bought the boat, the Violet, in St. Kitts and had it shipped to Anguilla. And then he had it completely remodeled. The photograph itself was taken in 1954. It was the last race that he saw, he won, because he died the next year before August Monday. But he was very, very pleased that day with the boat racing, of course, because the Violet won the race that year.
Those two guys got us into the boat racing as a pure sport. This is Elliot Carter's grandson, and his father is a very, very good boat builder too. So never mind him being shy, he got good heritage here. Why are we so fanatic about this sport?
When you're small, you go into Sanderground, and you're watching these guys taking part in this sport all the time and seeing the excitement that it creates down at the beach. You know, when guys come ashore, how they go on when they win a race and that sort of thing. When you go down to Sanderground, all you want to do is get inside a boat. So you go down there and you stick around all day, helping the guys ballast your boat, put up your sails and that. You want to be a part of that. You want to be the man on the tiller. The man that you saw when you was 10 years old. You want to be that man? No. It's just in your blood, I think. Once you go on boat racing, you spend time on racing boats, you end up in a boat. And once you end up in a boat, you ain't coming out. The boats is something that we build ourselves, so you know that it means more, even more to you when your boat achieves something, because you know you work on it yourself. A lot of it got to do with how much you put into it.
As a little boy, there was a boat called the Warrior One Party. I actually watched her construct from her keel up, and from there I learned how to build these boats. And the guy used to tell me everything he know. So I used to keep it in mind all the time. So up to this day, I still know it.
Stuff is boss. It's a local wooden clamp. They use it to bend the planks to get it in shape.
Yes, the music is sweet. Yes, the music is sweet. Happy it's sweet. The music
There are two features about the Anguillian racing boat hull that are unique. The absence of decks. The Anguilla racing boat has no deck, and therefore you will notice that boys have to bail. They have to bail sometimes constantly to keep the water out.
When I race, and I find when the water not rushing in the boat, you don't get an adrenaline rush. There's a rush you get when you see that water coming in the boat. And if another boat is side of you, two of you bong going out, and that water coming in that boat, man, and you trying to get it out, it's just like a rush.
The second thing is the long, low keel. That retards tacking because the keel runs along the whole length of the hull. So when a racing boat has to tack, as all racing boats have to do, the tacking is slow and somewhat tedious at times. That is again tradition, because the long keel was essential to be able to haul the boat up off the beach at the end of the smuggling day or at the end of the fishing day. Because of the vagaries of weather, the fact that Anguilla really has no safe anchorages, all the old sailors were very cautious, very conservative, and these boats were the only position they had. So the long keel facilitated rollers being able to be put on the beach, and all the guys were able to pull up the boat at the end of the working day or whatever.
Tonight is the night, you gonna know where Bali does go. Tonight is the night, you gonna know where Bali does go.
Some people say outside of Anguilla that you guys break the international rules of sailing. Like your hard lee, they say it's wrong.
That's our rule, so we don't break the rules. No, because this is our tradition thing. We shouldn't change the rules because of the international thing. This is what we know. This is what they teach me. That's what they know from their father.
To those who want to change the international rules, it's a part of our culture. So we're not gonna get away from that. You take away the sweetness of a race if you take out the Harley.
Boats on convergent tacks must tack away from each other. In other words, if they don't tack away from each other, there's going to be a god-awful collision. And the rule in that is that the crews must shout to one another the words hard lee, hard lee. And that is simply, captains, you must push your tillers hard down the lee side. And that turns the boats away from each other. It's wonderfully exciting. I think it's something that we should never give up, although it is dangerous. But it is a beautiful thing to watch.
My nephew is a good captain. He's my future captain. He take part in Anguilla boat race this year, and he do well.
Who do you look up to?
My uncle. I raised him all my life, so I have to look to him. He's the best. Yeah, he's a winner. His job is to keep the boat afloat and bring back the 13, 14 men ashore alive. It's a hard job.
So do they always do what he says?
We have to.
What happens if you don't?
She sink.
What do you think makes a good captain?
Being smart, know when to make the right decision or when not to, and winning make you a good captain too.
I want to lose. I don't like to lose. I like to always be first. If I can't be first or second, I say I win nothing, because I will always like to win.
The bragging rights, but you see, it's a lot of fun. You know, when everybody get together, you know, after the race is finished, and everybody get together, if I beat you today, it's all mine. I can tell you what I want, how I want, you know. You can't say nothing to me, because I is the best right now. I am top.
One of the fascinating things about Anguillian boat racing are the arguments that are conducted by people who are not on the boats and who don't race. And added to that is the fact that I like to say a boat never really loses. Because if it loses a race, there's a very good reason why it didn't win. And the guys will argue till they're blue in the face as to the legitimacy of that point, and to threaten that in the next race, I will prove to you why my boat is the best boat or the fastest boat. And that happens with every crew, with every team, and with every boat. That, to me, again, shows the rooting of the sport and the culture. The fact that these guys never give up. And if their boat isn't winning, they'll go and change this, they'll change that, they'll change the ballast. Sometimes they even change the whole boat. Even though they put the same name back, the whole boat could be changed just to stay in the competition and just to prove their point in the next race.
We are the best. We're better, be. The cleaners are here. I bet you we race tomorrow. We got the yard, we can race tomorrow.
We'll be back. Well, we can keep going while I am done. What do you think there is?
What they don't understand is that this is nothing new. This is not them talking. This is genes talking. This is history talking. This is tradition talking. Because their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers would be saying the exact same thing.
Anguilla was an island where fishing was very, very vital. And so there were a lot of boats. And if two boats were coming in from Prickly Pier, from fishing, that was a race between them. And there was bragging rights, you know. The important thing was the bragging rights.
So why do you guys like boat racing?
Well, bragging rights for me, mostly.
You want to show off?
Yeah, exactly.
When a boat wins, the village, the community, the family of the crew just gets so much pride and so much bragging rights. And the interesting thing about it is it is not just the boat, but it's also the community from which the boat comes. That's so important, right? If it's an island harbor boat or a sandy ground boat, that community feels that, you know, they're the kings of the hill.
Well, I love boat race because I love to win and brag. That's what I love boat racing for. I'm a bragger, a winner.
At the start of a race, a warning gunshot or horn is sounded, at which point the boats are turned around and held stern first into the beach by ropes. A final horn is sounded, and they are loosed and allowed to sail off downwind. The first leg of the race is normally a passive run off the wind, with all the boats sailing down towards a marker placed several miles offshore. The boats then round the marker under the rule of follow the leader. Captains and crews are free to choose any tack and any direction they feel will be most beneficial in helping them to get back to the finish line. Tacking back and forth is the main activity of this leg of the race, and the means by which boats will garner victory or suffer defeat. the Anguillian racing boat sails on today as a graceful symbol, a reflection of a past laden with poverty, neglect, and depression, ripples beneath the surface of the clear blue waters, while the grace and beauty of the boat rises above the bitter tides of history as a symbol of heroism and survival. The boats that race these waters stand as a reminder of a resilient people with a profound ability to adapt and an honorable willingness to remember a simple legacy nurtured by the sea and a commitment to endure.
We love boat racing, we love boat racing. Tell them it is our thing. Fire the shot. Oh, 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 oh. Over 60 years ago, traveling to and from Santo Domingo. Well, this story have been told. Our forefathers of old used to race at sea so courageously. And when that journey was abolished, they used to race when they go out to fish. That was the humble beginning of our boat racing, which is so unique and exciting. Many of us should remember, down in Sandy Ground Harbor, 3 boats fighting to the finish. It was a joy and pleasure to those who were there to witness it. But when Harold gone, and when George gone, when Tates and Coakley gone, boat racing got to go on. And when Belto gone, when Balde gone, Evo and Thomas gone, boat racing got to go on. Young people learn to build and sail a racing boat, so we could continue forever our national sport. Let me teach it in the schools. Oh, 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 oh. Ayo, sweet like sugar. When one boat race done, we could hardly wait for the next one to come. Yes, man. For boat racing in this land, it does bring us so much fun, and it's a joy for us to follow it up and down. And on Anguilla Day, we following them boats all of the way. It is an annual tradition to sail around ever should remember the first Anguilla they winner, and she won many more. Manny Shan is a true champion, going around the island. But when Percy gone, and when Alvin gone, when Ponto and Harris gone, boat racing got to go on. And when Eric gone, Ron and Moon gone, Calvert and Mumba gone, boat racing got to go on. Young people learn to build and sail a racing boat, so we could continue forever our national sport. St. Martin people like it too. Oh, 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 oh. Yes, man. We congratulate all of you, both owners, captains, and crews, for your dedication, time, energy, and money that you put into boat racing in this country. It isn't easy to own a racing.
Racing boats all over the world, of course, are not powered by motors, they're powered by the wind, and therefore they have to manipulate the wind in their sails to get to their objective. So that means that when they're racing into the wind, they have to tack from side to side to take advantage and exploit the wind as it blows across the sails. Now, contrary to popular belief, the prevailing wind is never completely steady. It sometimes breaks up into small eddies or little puffs of winds, or what we call flaws, that ripple across the ocean and hit the sails as they pass by. Now, some flaws, puffs, or eddies come towards the bows of a boat, a sailing boat, and for the captain to take advantage of them, he usually has to turn away from where he really wants to get to and lose the advantage. Sometimes the winds come straight against the sails like this, and they help him to turn the sailing boat into the wind, which of course is an advantage. In some traditional racing terms in other countries, this eddy that is a disadvantage is called a header, and this eddy or puff is called a lifter. In the Anguillian racing tradition, this is called a flaw, a baffling flaw. It baffles the boat, turns it away from its objective. And this flaw is called a favoring flaw. It's the same thing, just two different terminologies. Now, the job of the guy who sits right behind the shrouds, in some cases right in front of the shroud, is the job of the forward man. And his primary job, apart from bearing out the jib in attack, is to look for these flaws and to read the wind and to tell the captain what he should or shouldn't do. And when he sees a baffling flaw, he calls a baffling flaw is coming. If he sees a favoring flaw, he calls that there's a favoring flaw approaching, take advantage of it. But when the wind is steady, when there are no flaws, when everything is sailing as it should, he simply says to the captain, "Nuttin Bafflin," or "nothing is baffling." In other words, everything's okay, all is well. And because everything is okay with Anguillian boat racing, I choose to call the story Nuttin Bafflin.